Welcome to Unique People Stories. A frightening lunch break in the park. The story I want to share with you happened 1 year ago. Not long after the beginning of the first semester. I was 20 by then and I used to hang out near my university a lot at this time of the year because the weather was still really nice and warm. And my university was adjacent to a park. As we had a 3 hours break, a friend of mine asked me if I wanted to eat lunch in the park rather than in the cafeteria. I said yes and we went there. It was a regular school day, probably a Thursday, and the place was filled with kids. Students and people walking their dogs, so not empty at all. It may seem odd to underline this, but I rarely go by myself in a park if there's no one else around because it makes me feel nervous. Kind of vulnerable. I'm an overly anxious person. Don't judge me. But this day, the place was crowded. And we hardly managed to find a place somewhere on the grass for us to sit. We ate, talked and enjoyed the sunny weather for a good hour. After an hour, the park was way emptier than when we arrived. Almost all the children had left. And we were quite on our own. As we both wanted to smoke a little before returning to classes, and now that we wouldn't bother anyone with the smoke, we rolled 2 joints. I know it's not especially a good thing, but it was our little habit when we hang together anyway. The past belongs to the past. Right? I was focused on rolling up when my friend suddenly asked me, "Do you see them?" I looked in the same direction as her, but I couldn't see what she was talking about. She insisted, "Those guys with the bag. They are staring at us." And then I saw them. 50 meters away from us. 2 guys who seemed a little older than us were standing in the middle of the way, looking intensely at us. They had literally no expression on their face. I'm kind of used to creepy men. Whether they are polite or much more intrusive, you know. Those who follow you in the streets. Those who inexplicably stare at you in the bus for 30 minutes. Those who won't leave your side until you give them your number. It can be really easy to get rid of them, but those kinds of encounters are often awkward, embarrassing, or worse. So I felt a little uncomfortable. Although I wasn't worried. As I kept looking at them, I understood that they were going to talk to us. I asked my friend if she knew them. And she answered no, adding that she hoped they would not come over to say hi. Unfortunately, 3 minutes later, they were right in front of us, smiling. They were too. The first to talk introduced himself as Mani. He was a small and short-haired guy who was obviously on drugs, but I wouldn't know which ones, to be honest. The other one was a tall, pale, quiet guy. I can't remember his name, let's call him Steve to make things easier. Mani talked and smiled a lot. He introduced himself and his friend. Asked us about our day. Praised the warm temperatures. He seemed either unable to shut up or desperately trying to play it cool with us. Before we could even tell them to leave, he invited himself to join us on the grass, assuming that we would be okay with it. As a welcoming gift, he opened his bag. It was a huge plastic bag, one you would take to do some groceries, and showed us a 4.5 liters bottle of vodka. I couldn't help but judging them. It was like 1 p.m. in a park, in daylight. So it felt kinda ridiculous to me. His friend handed us a tiny and already used paper cup. But we declined the offer, saying that we needed to stay sober because we had classes to attend 2 hours later. Unfortunately, they had already drank a fair amount of vodka. And they kept insisting until my friend told them I'm not the type of person who would drink vodka right after lunch. I either drink it on Friday night with my friends, or pass my turn. Don't ask us again. I should tell you now. My friend is not a scaredy cat at all. To be honest, she's the bravest person I've ever met. And she's never uncomfortable in front of strangers. Usually, when she's bothered by a weird guy, she either acts weirder than him to make him feel more uncomfortable, or laughs it off making jokes and acting friendly until she tells him to leave because she'd rather be alone, or, in the worst cases, she kicks his ass and leaves. So, even if she didn't want their company, she was still unperturbed and relaxed way more than I was, and it felt good to have her by my side. They must have felt that she was serious because they stopped insisting and instead they started to ask us things like, "Are you students? Do you have a boyfriend? Can I have your number?" And so on. We were both in a relationship and not interested in the two of them, but it didn't stop them from flirting. They kept complimenting us in a heavy, unpleasant, clumsy way. And we began to feel embarrassed. We could clearly tell that alcohol was unleashing them. They were annoyingly enticing, openly flirty. And it escalated quickly from sympathetic remarks on the way we were dressed to nasty sexual advances. As I said, we were not interested. But they didn't take no as an answer. I was so uncomfortable that I avoided eye contact as much as I could while trying to find a way for us to get out of this situation. At this point, 2 other guys, supposedly their friends, came and sat with us. Even though we didn't tell them that they could. They looked dirty, idle and stoned. And one of them had a scrawny dog full of fleas. Not really reassuring, but we kept our thoughts for ourselves. My friend said something like we should probably go back to college now, but it didn't work the way we planned. They offered to come with us, claiming that it was not the first time that they crashed classes just for fun. We replied no. Thanks. We don't want to get into troubles, but Mani insisted again. We declined. He kept insisting, saying don't worry. It's no big deal. And suddenly he pulled a gun out of his pants and brandished in front of us. With a proud expression on his face. We immediately stopped smiling. First, because we live in France, carrying guns is neither allowed nor usual, and second, because we felt trapped. The gun looked old but real, heavy and extremely dangerous in his drunken hands. It was not funny anymore. I was genuinely afraid of what would happen next. One of his friends, the one with the dog, let's call him Nick, started to panic. Got up and said, "Are you fucking crazy? Don't you know I got heroin on me?" To which Mani replied, "Chill out. There are no cops here." His friend shook his head and took his bag, ready to get out of here. Then Mani pretended to be aiming at Steve. And he told us, with a big carnivorous smile, that he could totally shoot him without being in trouble. Steve seemed a little nervous. Nick walked away, yelling that he didn't want to be seen with us because it was too risky, and I couldn't disagree. We were in the middle of the day, in an almost empty park. So the scene seemed quite unreal. I just thought, crap. I've never been this close to a gun. And its owner is a drunk man who doesn't want us to go. It looked bad. He turned towards us, exhibited the weapon, and asked for our opinion. Do you like it? I'm not a huge fan of guns. I replied. Are you scared? Maybe. I tried my best to hide the fact that I was scared because I didn't want him to notice it and to take advantage of me. Even my friend kept a fake smile on her face to keep up appearances. He quickly put it back in his pants and stared at us for a long time with a wary eye. After what he strangely asked, "What did you see?" I figured he was talking about the gun, but I couldn't understand why he would ask such a thing with such a suspicious tone. He asked again. So I said I saw nothing, and he laughed. My answer may seem stupid, but I didn't want him to feel proud or to give him this kind of power over us by letting him know that we were afraid of the weapon. I thought it was stupid to carry a gun and to point it at his friend. But he simply kept laughing. And his laugh sounded awful to my ears. Like the one of a cold-blooded sociopath. I was so nervous that my hands were shaking. My friend must have noticed it because, all of a sudden, she took my arm and told everyone, "Oh crap. We're late. We must go. Have a nice day," before running away. They shouted, "Can we have your phone number at least?" And she replied, without even looking back, "No. But have a nice day anyway." We never walked so fast to get to classes than this day. Even though we ended up not attending to the lecture because our teacher was sick and we didn't know. We were still so astounded by what just happened that it took us several hours to process. And after that, we avoided the park for a long period of time. So to the drunk, creepy guys of the park who had a gun for no reason, let's not meet again. Ever. Edit. I want to add something because it may be confusing. We had no idea of who they were, what business they were in, or what kind of things they could do. We could only make assumptions because, well, some of them were casually carrying hard drugs and Mani had a gun. But one thing was sure, they all seemed pretty fucked up as human beings. We could have asked them why they have those things on them, but it felt too risky. We were 2 defenseless girls, and it felt safer to stay quiet about those delicate subjects. We also never told the police because we had no idea of what proof or evidence we were supposed to give them. I hope it makes sense to you as well. Thank you for listening.